Hi, I'm Robin Smith, one of the members of the Education Equity Funding Study, and I'm going to do a little presentation about what we found in our research. And if you have problems with hearing me or other issues, let us know. Okay, I apologize. My voice is creaky. It's allergies. Excuse me. At its 2021 convention, the League of Women Voters of Virginia approved a study of education equity in the Commonwealth. And League members from across the state, excuse me, set out to research and document whether all children in Virginia have access to a high quality education. And if not, what changes need to be made in funding public K-12 schools. We had three subcommittees. Subcommittee 1 defined high quality education. Subcommittee 2 looked at whether Virginia's education funding was equitable, considering the wide disparity in capacity and funding among school divisions. And then Subcommittee 3 compared how Virginia ranks among states in basic funding for education. We hope you've read our full report, which gives a clearer and wider view of this complex issue than this presentation will. Of course, we all know why the League believes in public schools. High quality education is its foundation for our democracy. It's essential to providing students with the skills they need to become active citizens, and it's available to all children, whatever their family's wealth, ethnicity, religion, or other factors. But what you might not know is that Virginia is the 10th wealthiest state, yet in per pupil funding, we rank 41st, joining states like Missouri and Mississippi. And our study found that state funding of local schools is both inadequate and inequitable. Virginia has the resources, but not to adequately fund schools, but not the will to do so. And we also have the ability to assess local school divisions, their capacity to pay, and to design formulas that will fund public schools in a way that will provide a high quality education for all students in Virginia's public schools. Part of the problem is the Constitution. Excuse me. I'm sorry, y'all. The Virginia Constitution states that the General Assembly shall seek to ensure that an educational program of high quality is established and continually maintained. It's that business about seeking. The difference between shall seek to ensure and actually shall provide. And this is the way the language reads. The General Assembly shall provide for a system of free public elementary and secondary schools for all children of school age throughout the Commonwealth. So they must provide a free public education system, but they shall seek to ensure that an educational program of high quality is established and continually maintained. Now, standards for high quality education are established by the State Board of Education in the Standards of Quality, a document which is subject to approval and funding by the General Assembly every 2 years. The General Assembly has consistently underfunded the standards of quality recommendations that they have approved. And our study concluded that unless the language changes in the Virginia Constitution that describes the state obligation to provide a high quality education for all students, unless this language is changed from aspirational to being a requirement, not much is likely to change. Other states have successfully brought court action to force their states to increase school funding based on their state constitution's stronger language. A case was brought against Virginia, but the judge ruled that while schools are clearly underfunded, the Constitution does not require the General Assembly to adequately fund schools. So they don't have to, so you can't do anything about it. Now, again, our ranking in 2021, we invested $4.3 billion less than the average of other states with comparable household incomes. And again, we're the 10th wealthiest state, but in what we actually pay, we rank 41st. Average teacher pay is 10% below the national average, or it was in 2020, and starting teacher salaries are 25th out of 50. We got a D in education funding from the Educational Law Center. So there are clearly statewide problems with Virginia's education funding. Now, the per pupil funding across the state varies as much as $10,000 per student, which could result in a $200,000 funding difference for a classroom of 20 students. One classroom could have $20,000 more spent on it than another classroom with the same number of students. And the problem is the fact that the localities, not the state, bear the majority of the cost for public education. Now, all the localities spend beyond the standard requirements, but the amount varies. But they spent a lot more than what was required to meet the minimum requirements. Now, this is an example of how things can vary. Let me move this so y'all can see this. If, depending on where a student goes, how much will be spent on his or her education. A student in Arlington has $19,744 spent per pupil. A student in Norton has $9,707 spent per pupil. This makes a big difference. And let's see, move this down. These inequities are intensified because rural areas have borne the brunt of state funding cuts. The state share of funding has decreased by 5.4% statewide, but it's down 6.8% in rural areas. Staff to student ratios have improved statewide, but have decreased in local schools. Poor school divisions do not have the resources to provide the same level of personnel, programs, and services as wealthier school divisions. Full funding by the state for these additional programs and services would reduce some of these inequities. And again, per pupil funding across the state can vary as much as $10,000 per student and over $200,000 per classroom. This is clearly not equitable funding. And the numbers show the disparity among our school divisions as far as how much they're able to pay and how much they do pay. Now, if you look at this chart, there are 3 columns in here. The first one here lists how much the locality spends per pupil. The next one gives its rank within the state, their funding rank. So example, Fairfax is 4th in the state. There are only 3 other localities that spend more per pupil. Now, as far as fiscal capacity, though, this is Fairfax's actual ability to pay. Now, you'll notice here with Fairfax, they rank 4th, but as far as fiscal capacity, they're 11th. So they're actually paying a little more than they could afford to based on their rank. They're doing better than you would expect them to. Now, if you look at some of these other ones, Giles County is a reverse of that. Giles County spends $10,914 per student. Their funding rank is way down there at 111. Their capacity is actually a little bit better than that. Now, you'll see the same thing in Washington County. Washington County spends $11,000 per student. Their funding rank is 108, which is a little above Giles County, but they are much more able to pay than Giles County is. They're 77th in the list, whereas Giles County is 104. Their funding rank is 108, where their ability is 77. Now, on the flip side of that, as you'll see places like Lee and Petersburg, Lee County spends $11,965 per student. They are 58th in the state as far as how much they spend, but in their ability to pay, they're actually down at 132, the lowest one on this chart. So they're doing much more than you would expect them to be able to do as far as funding students' education. Petersburg is in the same boat. Petersburg pays $12,714 per student, which gives them a ranking of 41st in the state, but their ability to pay is down at 120. So they are doing more than they can afford to do. And so these funding gaps persist all across the state. Now, in this elementary school classroom in rural Lee County, Pupils study among trash cans that catch rain from the school's leaking roof. During a tour of schools in King and Queen County, a Virginia Pilot editorial described a school that looked like it was, quote, on the far side of the moon, unquote, compared to other schools in nearby, more urban peninsular communities. With more than half of Virginia's schools over 50 years old, and many even older than that, the state now has an overdue bill of more than $25 billion just to replace inadequate schools. This is not a problem that's unique to one part of the state. It's in all regions. So Virginia's oldest buildings are also in the poorest divisions. These divisions can't support bond referendums or repay loans for capital projects with their low incomes and tax bases. In Prince Edward County, which is where I live, we drastically need to replace an elementary school that also has trash cans placed strategically to catch roof leaks on rainy days, and it would cost us $39 million to build that school. That would require a 25.5% increase in property tax in this county with a median household income of $44,000. Now, schools can apply to have a referendum on a 1-cent sales tax increase to spend on schools, but in 2022, Prince Edward applied and the General Assembly refused to allow us to send out a referendum on this particular tax. Now, you can see that even if we were able to get the tax, we would be in the same boat as Norton is. If Arlington passed a 1-cent sales tax increase, that could reap $7,700,000. If Norton did the same thing, all they would get out of it is $23,000, which wouldn't be enough to do much of anything, much less build a new school. And until the latest budget that was actually passed, the last time the state made school construction grants, now grants, not loans, but grants, was available to localities was in 2009. Now, there's also the Literary Fund, which has a primary function of providing low interest loans to school districts for school construction. In the last 5 years, though, only $24 million of the Literary Fund went in loans to school construction, while $790 million has gone toward teacher retirement costs. Now, the Virginia Department of Education has guidelines and standards for school facilities when old schools are renovated or new ones are built. But these standards fall short of guaranteeing that all students will have adequate schools and classrooms, because first, a locality must have the capacity to build or renovate to even consider worrying about meeting the recommendations that are in those recommendations, in those guidelines. Now, again, teacher salaries are also very problematic. They're below the national average. Starting salaries are 25th. And this is also troubling, this third bullet item on here. Virginia teachers make 32.7% less than other professionals with comparable education. In 2021-22, 25% of Richmond's teachers resigned at the end of the year, and schools all over the country and the state are having trouble with retention, and we can see why. Now, if we look at this chart, let me move this over here. This chart is showing you how much less teachers make in each state compared to other people with a comparable education. You can see Virginia here with 32.7%. Now, at the time this chart was done and this first study was made, we were last in the whole country. We paid our teachers relative to other professionals the worst in the whole country. Now, a newer meta-analysis, excuse me, was published in August of 2022 by the Economic Policy Institute, and that one shows that we've moved up a little bit. We are now 48th. So now Oklahoma and Colorado are worse than we are. But whatever study you use, our teachers earn 32.7% less than their peers, one of the worst gaps in the nation. Now, there was good news in the 2022-23 budget, which is the last one actually passed. At the time, wait a minute, I'm trying to get this thing. At the time, Virginia had a 1.94 billion budget surplus, mostly because of COVID. Now, so in that budget, school funding was up by almost 3 billion. They offered teacher and staff raises of 5%. But remember, when the state boasts about 5% pay increases, the state pays less than half of that. In a previous budget year, one county had to reject raises for its teachers because they simply couldn't afford their share. The state is making some effort to balance the need and the capacity of school divisions, but it still leaves behind rural and city schools, where students in areas of poverty are likely to need more services and more expensive services if our state's goal is equity in education. In that latest budget, there was 145 million for at-risk programs for high poverty school systems. Another 800 million went to one-time construction grants. And the literary fund was used better. 50 million went for grants, not construction loans, but grants, and another 400 million went in for construction loans. So things were better in that budget. Now, I'm sure all of you have heard of the problems caused by the elimination of the state grocery tax. And a mistake in the way Department of Ed calculated created a $200 million shortfall for local school systems. The problem was made worse when the then superintendent and the DOE delayed telling legislators about the era in time for them to build a solution into the state budget. And this year, with the 2023-24 budget, the battle over education funding continues. We don't have a budget yet, so we don't know exactly what's happening, but Governor Youngkin's budget proposes $1 billion in tax cuts, primarily for corporations and high-income households. Now, the Senate budget increases funding for public education by $1 billion. We don't know how this will end, and the General Assembly has no legal mandate to adequately fund public education, so there's no pressure there. Now, school funding could be an issue and can be an issue that bridges partisan politics. A Republican House member, Delegate Israel O'Quinn, and a Democratic Senator, Jennifer McClellan, jointly sponsored a $450 million school construction assistance program in 2022. We need to see more of this. Well, hold on a minute. What the General Assembly didn't do in any recent budget is develop any kind of a long-term funding policy that will guarantee a high-quality education for all. They didn't fund the standards of quality as a minimum, and they have reduced future tax revenues, which will put future funding at risk. Now, as a result of what we discovered with our study, we had developed some strategies that we thought should be adopted. And the primary one, the key one, is amending the Virginia Constitution to state that the General Assembly shall provide, rather than the current language of shall seek to ensure, an educational program of high quality. Now, this is not a new idea. In 1969, 6 Republican and Democratic legislators tried unsuccessfully to get a referendum for just this change to the Constitution. Let's hope this is an idea whose time has come. Now, we also have strategies for operational funding. One, they need to fully fund the standards of quality. The standards of quality barely meet the criteria for high quality education. And dumping that burden on localities skews funding issues even more. We basically, just need to pay more per pupil. We need to raise, our per pupil investment to the average of what other top 10 income states are doing. We need to increase teacher salaries so that they're comparable to the salaries of those with a comparable education. Now, we also need to offer no loss funding. Now, this refers to the fact that when student populations decline, the number of students goes down in the middle of the funding cycle, school systems can lose money that they had budgeted in. The other thing is we need to offer English language learner funding that is comparable to other states. The Governor Northam proposes increasing the staff percentage for English language learners in his last budget, but he still didn't include, his last proposal, but he didn't include any money. Now, we also think that these strategies for infrastructure are critical. The state needs to commit to funding school construction using grants and other mechanisms based on a division's ability to pay and not put it totally in the lap of the locality. We need to increase and continue to increase and prioritize using literary fund money for school infrastructure. The minimum building standards that are part of the standards of quality need to include all schools, not just ones that are being renovated or built new. All schools need to meet those standards. And if they're not in the standards of quality, that won't happen. We could issue state bonds dedicated to school construction to address that $25 billion deficit. And that could allow localities to impose, excuse me, that 1% sales tax for school construction, of course, subject to voter approval, but it'll let the localities decide if they want to do that, not the General Assembly. And one strategy suggested in our report is totally within the league's control, and over time could help develop the political will needed to effect this necessary change. The League of Women Voters of Virginia should continue its efforts to educate the public about the benefits of a high-quality public education. You don't hear much about that. To develop partnerships with other state organizations, and to advocate actively for increased and more equitable school funding and improve the stories, the narratives that are told about our schools. Again, I hope you have a chance to read the main report, which gives a clearer and wider view, but this will give you an overview at least. Okay, now let me stop the sharing.
I think you already did.
Yeah, I think you did. We all can see
Okay, good.
each other.
You can see all the folks. Okay, good. Questions? Comments?
Well, you guys did an amazing job. And I totally agree with you that we need to educate this. I had, coming from Arlington, I had no idea the disparities, and it's ridiculous. And I totally agree that we need to do education and do it immediately, especially because we can't get a constitutional amendment for a while because of our crazy system. But
Yeah.
I think just getting this information to people, because nobody thinks that Virginia has that low, it's Virginia. We don't have that problem, and I think education was totally key. And I commend you all on what you've done and the extent of this work and what we can do with it. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Everybody worked hard. And it was disheartening when we looked at some of the old education position statements of the league. A lot of this stuff has been on the radar of the league for a long time. I don't think the constitutional amendment has, but that's something that again will take time, but we need to start on that. We really do, because until the General Assembly has a legal mandate to fund schools to what they define as being adequate, nothing's going to happen, and everybody's held hostage every time we go through this budget cycle. Glad I'm not a principal or a superintendent.
Yeah.
I have a comment.
Yes.
40 years ago, when I was in a PTA, this was, and in a small county, it was Clark County near Winchester. This was a big topic of concern. I mean, and nothing has happened in probably more than 40 years. I mean, zero. Some of you in Northern Virginia say, oh, we're really surprised, but those of us who live in rural areas are not surprised at all. This has been going on forever. And it hasn't gotten any better at all. And I don't know how you change that.
Well, I don't think you do change it until the state accepts responsibility for paying. You know, you can't get blood out of a stone.
Yeah.
And it amazes you when you look at some of these statistics. Some of these counties are just, they're working so hard to provide for their students and just giving everything they can, but with the local resources they have, they just can't do it. They just can't do it.
And I think you're right. I think this idea that we in the North don't, know that, but if we did, I guarantee you people would be furious. And that's why I think education is key. Susan Bivens asked in chat, were there any changes made to the consensus questions following various league input? And then Judy Collins has her hand up.
Okay, Beth or Mary, do y'all want to address that one? I've completely forgotten whether we changed the consensus. I don't think we changed the questions. We couldn't change the questions.
I
think
think
in the
there was,
report.
Oh.
we had used, I think, a term handicapped in one of the, and we changed that. Mary, do you remember? I don't remember that we made a lot of changes.
No, basically the consensus responses were very positive, and all but 2 of the leagues were in favor of amending the Constitution to replace aspirational language with language that will legally require the General Assembly to provide a high-quality public education. And that they were basically leagues that were just mixed in their individual responses. When we were revising the positions, we were aware of the report and also the consensus responses. But I actually have this in front of me, and I don't think that there was much that we changed.
We changed the language occasionally.
Yeah.
Not just with the handicap, but sometimes just shifting the emphasis a little bit to reflect people's opinions. But I don't think we changed the strategies anyway at all. And
Right.
we didn't change our findings, but we did. I don't think we changed the actual strategies that we were proposing. There was some concern over the who are the other top 10 states as far as income, and there was some issues about that and whether we were trying to compare apples and oranges and stuff, but nothing else really, I think, that had a major effect.
Judy, did you want to ask your question?
Yeah, in terms of the resources, I know when I was working on the election integrity position, looking at the per capita income in Arlington versus Wise County is just astonishing. But in your study, did you all look at what other states may have done in terms of equalizing grants out to the counties, based on what they need, so that, and way back in the dark ages, I did a master's thesis on school funding equalization out in Wisconsin and Minnesota. So, I didn't know if you had looked at what other states might have done to help with this problem of unequal property tax base.
Well, we did look at that, and one of the things we found, I didn't realize that other places did it differently. Most of the states that have a medium or high income, the state assumes responsibility for funding the schools. That's where that was at 41 million, we're less a year, billion, I can't remember what the number was, but some astronomical amount less that we're paying than most of the other ones. And it's because in those states, they accept the fact that the state is responsible for funding schools, And that includes construction of schools and infrastructure as well. And that was a real eye opener for us to see that there were other ways to do it and that we needed to do it another way.
Krista Rosa put something in chat and I'm trying to bring it up, but my
Yeah,
computer.
Chris asked, how is the cost of living factored into the per pupil funding numbers? And I know that the state formula does factor in poverty and other things, like there is a formula. There's a well-known Virginia Tech professor who's a nationwide expert on funding schools, and he says, you know, his comment was, well, they do make adjustments, but they just never funded enough. In other words, there is some effort in the state funding formulas, but simply the amount of money the state puts into it is totally insufficient. But I would say also to Chris's question too, the cost of living, obviously teachers in Northern Virginia, where there's a higher cost of living and higher tax bases, are paid higher rates than the teachers in many Southwest Virginia, South Side, other school systems. And some of this, you can say, makes sense, but also at the same time, I remember 60 years ago, my aunt and uncle moving from Pulaski, Virginia to Vienna. And what this higher pay, what the result of the higher teacher pay is it drains some of the best teachers out of poor school systems, whether no matter what part of the state they're in, is that it basically makes it harder for school systems, especially in poor school systems where we know we need some of the best teachers. It simply sucks them away. And if anything, maybe we should be paying a bonus for teachers to go to some of these smaller rural or urban low-income communities.
Are there other?
I don't see any questions in chat.
Some interesting comments, yeah.
I'm having a hard time opening the chat questions, so I hope somebody else.
Okay.
will.
Yeah, no, I'm watching them.
Yeah.
There are
Okay.
no more direct questions. There's comments, but there's no direct
Yeah,
questions of you
right.
all.
Yeah, and I think about other states having court-ordered funding reform. I think Robin mentioned, I believe it was Kentucky, that not long ago did federal judge ordered them to equalize their funding.
Chris, your hand's up.
Yeah, so obviously, it's a great concern to me and all of us. I think that the governor is going to try and do massive cuts. You know, again, you referred to this, when we have such need for that surplus to fund our schools. Does that call for a resolution at our convention to make a statement, or should we encourage all our members to contact our local delegates and senators? You know, I guess they're still working the budget, right? They haven't come to an agreement,
Yeah.
but you know, we need to say this is ridiculous. We have schools that need this funding, and don't give it back to the rich or the corporations. Anyway, that's my thought.
The sad thing here in Montgomery County, just I guess last week or a week before last, the Board of Supervisors did split along political lines to give significant tax cut to taxpayers in the real estate tax rate at a time when.
Wow, I've never heard of
Yeah,
anybody going
yes.
back on a tax rate.
Yeah, at a time when school board members and even the superintendent, who usually is not very outspoken, commented that that will really put a dent in the local school budget, of course, which we're hoping to give the 5% raises. But it's a shame that we're now seeing that divide on local boards of supervisors, of which I don't think we had always seen before.
I was going to say something.
Yeah, I wanted to make a comment. Chris asked about a resolution at convention, and so I wanted to talk a little bit about that. And if you go to our website and under convention documents, you can see what the rules are for submitting a resolution. The timing, I think, makes it tricky to try to submit one on equity, because the resolutions are going to be submitted before the vote on the position. And so one of the rules about a resolution is that you have to already have a position that supports it. So I don't quite know how you do that, but I would encourage you that if there is something that you think it is important to have the weight of the body behind, a resolution is an opportunity to do something like that. It's basically a statement of the delegate saying, this is important to us, this is timely, we believe strongly, and it's an opportunity to make a statement.
I don't see anybody else's hands. Nothing in chat. I'll reiterate, you guys did an amazing job. And I think, Carolyn, you said, how do we turn the position into advocacy? I think once, assuming the position is adopted, I don't want to assume things, but let's assume it is. I think they laid out a blueprint tonight to start. And obviously the big one would be the amendment, the moonshot. That's what people like to call these things. But I think we've seen a lot of things that you've mentioned tonight that, I've been jotting down going, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. So I don't think that would be very hard to do. Well,
And Deb has the PowerPoint, if anybody needs to go back. I'm sure I was talking at warp speed. If you look in the notes on the PowerPoint, any of the commentary is down there.
yeah, and Deb is going to put everything up on the website. The recording and the slides will be at that convention link. If you go to the website and just look under convention and councils, and you'll see 41st biennial, everything you need to know for that is there. And these recordings of all of these pre-convention caucuses will be there for everybody to review.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Robin, for the presentation again.
Apologize for my
Excellent
voice.
job.
Oh, please, it's everywhere. It's everywhere.
Are we done?
Deb, anything else? Nope. Okay.
I don't have anything else. If you do think of any questions that you have, please send them to the program chair, program@lwv-va.org, and Carolyn can forward those to the committee. This is your best opportunity before we get to convention to ask your questions. So want to make sure you get that opportunity. So thank you all. And to reiterate what Joan said, really quality work. And thank you so much for your contributions to our advocacy efforts.
Thank you, everybody.